Please be seated. Mr. Sauter, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Judge. The people would call Denicia Armstrong to testify. And Ms. Armstrong, as we already discussed, if you could remove your mask when you sit down. And when you're ready, if you could scoot up to the mic and state your full name and spell your last name for the record, please.
Denicia Armstrong, Armstrong, Armstrong.
Thank you, Ms. Armstrong. And did you just get off work today before coming here?
I did.
And where do you work?
I work with Girl Scouts Heart of Michigan.
Okay. Well, thank you for being here today. I want to take you back to July 15th of last year, 2020, both the 14th into the 15th of that year. At the time, where were you living?
I was living with my mom, but I
Okay,
moved in.
Can we turn up her microphone on the witness stand? No, don't you push it. Okay, try it again.
Testing. Okay.
There we go.
All right. I was living with my mom, and at the time I was looking for a place to stay, and my mom contacted Kara, that is Alexa's mom, and Alexa's mom, she encouraged me to move with Alexa because she had an extra room in her duplex. So I did for a while.
Okay. And was that duplex, was that at 4493 Mackinac Road?
Yes.
Okay. And were you actually living in that room, that extra room, on the dates of July 14th and 15th of last year?
Yes.
Okay. And prior to that point in time, did you know an individual by the name of Latrell King?
I didn't know him, no.
Did you get to know who he was after you moved in?
If you define get to know, I just knew his name.
Okay. And did you know if he had any association or relation to Alexa?
Not prior to that, but I learned that he did.
And what was that relationship?
They were boyfriend and girlfriend to my knowledge.
Okay. And back on July 14th of last year, can you recall if Miss Van Warmer and the defendant Latrell King left that residence together at some point in the night?
Oh, yeah, several times.
Okay. And after they had left, did they leave together?
Yes.
Okay. And after they left together the first time, at some point in time, did Latrell come back to the residence while you were present?
Yes.
Can you describe that and what happened?
Well, he knocked on the door. He asked me if I seen Alexa. I told him no. And he asked to use my phone. Then he used my phone and he went somewhere in the house. I don't know what he did, but after he used my phone, he left.
Okay. Did you think that was odd that he was there by himself?
Yes,
Okay.
because he left with her. Initially, I thought he was watching over her. So
Oh, thank you. And I guess at some point in time after Mr. King leaves and prior to you falling asleep, do you know if Alexa returned to the residence?
yes,
Can you describe that?
well, it was loud, so she opened, just came in the house and went to her room.
And at that point in time, was she by herself?
They were together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you then fall asleep at some point after Miss Van Warmer gets back to the residence?
Yes.
Are you awoken by something?
Yes.
And what wakes you up?
I hear noises in her room, and I walk out and I see him on top of her, and then she's screaming, "Get off of me!"
And you say him. Who are you referring to?
Latrell.
Okay. And if you were to see Latrell again, would you recognize him?
Yes.
Is he in courtroom today?
Yes.
Can you just point to where he's seated and describe what he's wearing for the record, please?
He's over there, and he's wearing a tan shirt.
Thank you. May the record reflect identification, Your Honor.
It shall reflect.
Thank you. And did you stated you observed the defendant on top of the victim and she was screaming?
Mm-hmm.
What else, if anything, did you observe at that time?
Well, when he got off of her, she started hitting him and screaming at him and saying, just mentioning what he did when they left. And that was basically, it was just chaotic.
Did he eventually leave after you witnessed that?
No.
Okay. And I guess at some point in time, did you know how he got into the residence on that date?
She described what he did,
Objection
how he
as to
got in there.
hearsay.
And
Objection.
and Ms. Armstrong, you don't need to get into what Ms. Van Warmer told you.
Okay.
Let me ask you this. Before you went to bed, did you think all the doors were locked to the residence?
Yes.
Okay. And did it surprise you to then see the defendant in the house later on after you thought the house was locked?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any idea how he got into the house? I'm not asking for what someone told you, but do you have any idea?
No.
Okay. And so at some point, does Latrell leave that duplex after you see him on top of the victim?
Yes.
Okay. And is this now into the early morning hours of July 15th of last year?
Yes.
Okay. And after that happens, what do you do next with Miss Van Warmer?
I tell her to call her mom, and because she's already looking for him, like she wanted to go and do something to him. So I just tell her to call her mom first, and then I mentioned that we should go see the police if she felt that way. But yeah,
And did you eventually go to a police station?
yes.
And where did you go?
I don't recall the police station, but they told us that they were familiar with the situation between them two.
And did you have a chance to give or state what you saw and observed on that date to an officer at that station?
Yes, he looked like he was used to it. So I just mentioned that I didn't feel safe, and I remember just her describing the bruises that she had from him and them trying to get.
Objection as to hearsay.
No response.
I'll sustain the objection.
Ms. Armstrong, I appreciate it, but let's not get into what Ms. Van Warmer stated to you.
Okay,
After this event happened, how did that make you feel?
uncomfortable
Okay, and how come?
because I shouldn't have been there, and they should have told me the situation that was going to happen anyway. I didn't know that they were having problems being together, and I didn't know that it was going to be an ongoing situation with them running in and out of the house at any kind of hours of the night. I don't like that, so I had to go.
Did you eventually move out of the residence?
Yes, I did.
How long after July 15th, if you can recall?
I can recall the day later, a day later.
So very quickly.
Yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, did Latrell have a key to that house?
No.
Okay. Other than when he knocked on the door and you let him in, was Latrell ever there by himself without Alexa?
No.
Okay. A moment, Your Honor. No further questions, Your Honor.
Questions, Mr. Crawford?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Call your next witness, Mr. Sauter.
People will call Detective Mindy Warden to testify. Detective, when you're situated, if you could say your full name and spell your last name for the record.
Detective Mindy Warden, Warden.
Are you currently employed, Detective?
Yes, I am with the Saginaw Township Police Department.
And what type of role?
I'm a detective,
How long have you been a detective with them for?
14 years,
How many total years in law enforcement do you have?
19.
Okay. And in your role as a detective, do you eventually get assigned the case that we're in court here today against the defendant Latrell King?
Yes.
Can you describe how cases just generally get assigned to detectives within the township?
Our detective bureau, we have several general case detectives. They are assigned randomly, sometimes based on specialty. Some of us have certain specialties.
Thank you. And what was the nature of this case, and the criminal nature of this case?
Home invasion, stalking, history of domestic violence.
And in your general training and experience, Detective, have you investigated other cases involving victims of assault or domestic violence?
Yes, hundreds.
Okay. And in general, Detective, is it common for a victim to always cooperate in a case?
Your Honor, may we approach?
You may.
Just to clarify, Detective, you've investigated hundreds of cases of domestic violence or assault.
Yes,
Okay. Fair to say you've dealt with a plethora of victims ranging from every sex and age and everything else.
yes,
All right. Now, on this particular case, did you learn out who the victim was?
yes.
And who was that?
Alexa Paris Van Wormer.
Okay. And what was the date of offense initially in relation to this case when you were assigned the detective?
The date of the offense, October 18th
Thank you, of 2020?
of 2020.
Okay, but fair to say you weren't there that night at her residence on October 18th or the early morning hours, is that correct?
That's correct. I would have been assigned the case days later.
Okay. And as part of your investigation, what did you specifically do in relation to this case?
In this case, because Latrell King was arrested that night for that incident, I would have had to prepare some paperwork, submit the report, photographs and such to the prosecutor's office so they could review all of the evidence that we had at that time and make a determination whether any charges would be appropriate against Mr. King.
And did you in fact do that?
I did,
And were certain charges issued?
yes,
Specifically, home invasion second degree, was that issued?
yes.
To your knowledge, do you know if the maximum possible penalty for home invasion second degree is more than 10 years in prison?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Now, going forward after this case and after the charges were brought, did you become aware that contact continued between the victim and the defendant after October 18th?
Yes, I was aware that there was continued contact.
Now, is that signs of concern in a case like this?
Yes,
And in general, on cases that involve violence or assault or domestic violence in nature, are no contact orders put in place as a standard precaution in every case like that within Saginaw County?
I wouldn't say always every case, but a majority of cases, when the charges are issued, if it's assaultive in nature, there is typically a no contact order issued by the arraigning or the signing judge.
And on this specific case that started back on October 18th, was eventually a no contact order put in place between the defendant and the victim?
Yes,
Prior to October 18th of last year, do you know if there was any other no contact orders put into place for the 70th District Court here in Saginaw?
yes, there was.
And how did you learn that?
When I was assigned the case, I would have done a file check of Latrell King through LEAN, which is a statewide database or a national database. And that would tell me whether he had any warrants, whether there was any open conditions, probation, those type of things. When I did that, I determined that there was a previous no contact order through a bond condition relating to a previous criminal case.
And are those no contact orders, are those court orders?
Yes,
All right. Have you had a chance to actually look at the pretrial release orders that
Yeah.
you mentioned?
yes.
Okay, and Judge, if I may approach.
You may.
Detective, I'm showing you people's proposed 39 and 40. What are we looking at in proposed 39?
People's proposed 39 is a pretrial release order issued for defendant Latrell King. And it states that in relation to a domestic violence case, there lists a variety of conditions that he needs to follow while out on bond related to that domestic violence. One of those conditions would be to not assault, harass, intimidate, beat, molest, wound, or threaten Alexa Van Wormer. Do not have or cause any third party to have any direct or indirect contact with Alexa Van Wormer.
Thank you. And what date was that signed by a judge?
This was signed by Judge Fickner on August 31st, 2020.
Okay, so roughly a month and a half before October 18th.
Yes,
Is that fair and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
yes.
Moving on to People's Proposed 40, what are we looking at in that exhibit?
People's Proposed 40 is also a pretrial release order for defendant Latrell King relating to a felonious assault. The conditions of this order state, amongst other various things, do not assault, harass, intimidate, beat, molest, wound, or threaten Alexa Paris. Do not have or cause any third party to have any direct or indirect contact with Alexa Paris.
Now, do you know Ms. Van Wormer's full name?
Yes,
And what's her full name?
Alexa Paris Van Wormer.
And for both of these cases that were issued, was Alexa Van Wormer the same Alexa who came in and testified, the listed victim on those cases?
Yes, she is.
Now, is People's Proposed 40 fair and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
What date was that signed and by what judge?
Signed by Judge Clark on September 1st, 2020.
And to the best of your knowledge, are those implemented when a defendant is being arraigned on criminal charges?
I'm sorry, say that again.
To the best of your knowledge, are those implemented or those conditions imposed when a defendant is being arraigned by the court?
Yes.
So would the defendant be given clear instructions by the court on those dates to not have contact with Alexa?
Yes.
Thank you. Judge, the people would move to admit People's Proposed 39 and 40.
Mr. Crawford. No objection. Exhibit 39 and 40 will be admitted. You may.
Now, Detective, I believe you stated that there was contact that had continued between the defendant and Ms. Van Wormer after October 18th of 2020.
That's correct.
And at least from what you stated at that point, there was at least 3 no contact orders issued by the County of Saginaw after October 18th of 2020.
Yes.
Okay. And when you found out that this contact was continuing, did that trouble you?
It did.
How come?
Because knowing that there had been a progressive history of assaultive behavior between the two of them, obviously I become concerned about the victim's willingness to cooperate, to follow through, their safety.
And did you have a chance then to investigate that communication?
Yes, I did.
As we've heard throughout the course of this case, I think it's become very apparent that the defendant has spent a decent amount of time in jail between October 18th of last year, correct? From
Yes.
then until February?
Say that again?
That he has spent time in jail from October of last year through February of this year?
Yes.
Okay. And were you able to actually locate any communication that he had with the victim, knowing that?
Yes, I did.
And can you describe how you found that out, please?
As investigators, we have access to the jail communication system, which includes phone calls. Jail inmates are allowed to possess or are assigned, given some sort of texting device. I don't know what it looks like. I believe it's like an iPad or an iPhone or something similar to that. So when they have money put in their account, they're able to communicate with family and friends via text messages. And so that is what I focused on, was any text messages between Alexa and Latrell.
Did you know Miss Van Wormer's number at that point in time?
Yes, I did.
Is it the number ending in 9117 that she previously testified that she had?
Yes.
Now, when you're searching that database that you're talking about from the jail, are you able to search it by the individual inmate?
Yes, multiple search variables, but can search by the inmate that's incarcerated, by a specific phone number, receiving or sending messages.
And were you able to conduct a search at that point, roughly in November of last year, to determine the types of communications between defendant and victim?
Yes, I primarily focused on text messages.
And did you focus on messages from Mr. King's account to that phone number of the victim?
Yes,
And did those both include outbound communication, meaning from the defendant to the victim, and then inbound communication, meaning from the victim to the defendant?
yes, both ways.
Okay. And were you able to find that because of those search variables you're allowed to use?
Yes,
And were you able to discover that communication had persisted between the defendant and the victim?
yes.
And during this investigation, and during the course of October last year through November, what did you find out when you searched those messages, specifically just the text messages between the defendant and the victim?
A lot of back and forth in their communication as far as whether it was wanted or unwanted by Alexa, whether she was initiating, whether she was ignoring. There would be, there was thousands of messages. Sometimes it would, it would be her one message to his 20, or, I'm not, just as an example, just a lot of back and forth. It was never a consistent, whether it was good or bad. It was both ways.
If I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
Again, Detective, I'm showing you what's been marked as People's Proposed 41 and 42. Did you actually draft those documents?
I did.
And did you compile certain text messages from the defendant to the victim and People's Proposed, is it 41?
41, yes, is from Luttrell to Alexis.
And again, how do you know that?
The jail's phone system shows each inmate is assigned a code number along with their name. And so these messages show coming from Luttrell King and being sent to a phone number, which we've identified as Alexis's phone number.
And in general, did you see any conversations from the defendant or text from the defendant discussing court?
Yes.
And can you describe the nature of those texts to the victim?
Basic messages that he's going off to prison, he doesn't want to die. Tell him you don't want me charged. A lot of suicidal type comments about wanting to kill himself.
And thank you. And moving on to, is it People's Proposed 42? Is that the other one?
42, yes.
Now, are those specifically messages from the victim to the defendant?
Yes,
And do we know that because they state inbound on their direction?
that's correct.
Now, again, I think all these messages in those two exhibits, what date range were they for? It's a short date range, but
These specifically are November 19th, 2020 through November 22nd, 2020.
okay, so just a very small date range for those messages.
Yes,
Okay, and are those fair and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
yes.
Move to admit 41 and 42, Judge.
Mr. Crawford.
Just a brief voir dire, Your Honor.
Yep.
Ms. Warden, those text messages, you indicated that you pulled those from your database, correct?
That's correct.
And the document that the prosecution wants to admit, those are specific messages that you pulled out of the conversations, correct?
Excuse me. I would have pulled out the entire communication. So it wasn't a portion of a message.
Okay.
There, if this paper has 15 messages on it, there may have been others in between these messages. But what is written here would be the complete message as it viewed from the jail screen.
Okay. So you're taking the complete message that whether Latrell sent, this is Latrell's full message, whether Alexa sent this is Alexa's full message.
That's
right?
correct.
But those messages, they're taken out of context and just placed into a document. So we don't have that full conversation, correct?
That's correct. At the time, the system didn't allow me to print off that PDF that we were able to do later.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Any objection to the admission?
I'm not going to object to that, Your Honor. It's been clarified. I'll just leave it as that.
All right. As was exhibit 42, you wanted admitted, Mr. Sal?
Is it 41 and 42, Detective?
Yes, 41 and 42.
Both exhibits will be admitted.
Thank you. Now, Detective, after, I think the last date on there, November 22nd, leading up to February 14th of this year, did you have a chance to then go back and look at all the text communications between the defendant and the victim during that time frame?
Yes,
Were they numerous?
thousands.
And in general, what was being discussed throughout the course of those messages?
Some was talking about their future together. Then it might change back to trying to convince Alexa to not come to court, to go talk to Latrell's attorney. Then it might be that he didn't want to go to prison, couldn't take it in jail. Their past relationship about good times, bad times, being faithful with each other.
And was that kind of a cyclical thing? This would keep happening kind of in a cycle?
Yes,
And you, like I stated, you had a chance to view all those messages. Is that correct?
yes.
And Judge, if I may approach.
You may.
That's People's Proposed 45, Detective. What are we looking at in that proposed exhibit?
This is a PDF printout of jail text messages, or chirps as they're called, from, it's a various date range here.
So if you could just, the first date's on the front, if you could list that date and look at the last page and tell me what that date is, please.
October 24th, 2020. And the last message is February 14th, 2021.
Okay. And again, does that include all the messages between the defendant and victim from that time frame?
No, not even close.
Is that a very small portion?
Very small.
In general, what do those messages associate with in that proposed exhibit that you're looking at?
Can you clarify your question?
The context of them. Is it similar to what you already stated happened in that short November timeframe we've already talked about?
Yes.
Okay, and again,
A lot of back and forth. I love you, and then the next day it's leave me alone, don't talk to me, block my number.
does the defendant talk about court and don't get me in trouble and things of that nature?
Yes.
And at points in time, does the defendant state that he's going to kill himself?
Yes, at some point, and I was concerned enough that I notified the jail of the content of those messages so that they could make sure to keep an eye on that behavior.
And as you described, kind of copying, pasting certain messages from the database on what you compiled for those November dates, are these the actual print off that would come from the jail database without you copying and pasting onto something else?
Yes.
And those would include the full messages that were sent on those specific dates?
41 and 42 are also full messages. There just may be some in between.
No, I know,
Okay,
but is that the exact same thing that we see here?
yes,
Okay, they're the full message. However, there might be some messages between those that aren't included.
that's correct.
All right. And is that exhibit fair and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes,
Is that 45?
Exhibit 45.
Would move to admit 45, Judge.
Mr. Crawford?
No objection.
Exhibit 45 will be admitted.
Thank you, Judge. And again, Detective, just so we're clear, you did have a chance through the course of your investigation to go through and look at the majority, if not all, of the text messages between the defendant and the victim between October 18th of last year through February 14th of this year. Is that correct?
Yes.
Just a moment, Your Honor. I guess my last question, Detective, would be, would you recognize Latrell King, the defendant, if you were to see him?
No, I did not have personal contact with him
Thank
throughout
you.
this investigation.
I have no more further questions, Your Honor.
All right, questions, Mr. Crawford?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Detective.
Good afternoon.
I just have a few brief questions for you, okay?
Okay.
I guess we want to start with some housekeeping matters. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I'm showing you what's been marked as defense's proposed exhibits 47 and 48.
Okay.
If you can just go through those real quick.
Okay.
Now, those are text messages that came from Latrell's chirp device at the county jail, correct?
That's correct.
And these are messages that you came across during the course of your investigation and provided to the prosecution, correct?
Correct.
You are familiar with those contents, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd move for the admission of defense proposed exhibits 47 and 48.
Mr. Sub. Exhibit 47 and 48 will be admitted.
Now, Detective, you were in court today and you got to listen to all the evidence, including the 911 call that we just listened to, correct?
Yes.
Now, on there, Alexis Van Warmer, she mentions that she has children, including a newborn who was in the car with her. Does Alexis Van Warmer have any children?
No, she does not.
So that was a lie that she told the 911 dispatcher? Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, this incident that we're here for and that they're to decide the charges on, home invasion, second degree, aggravated stalking, interference with the witness. This stems from an incident from October the 18th of 2020, correct?
Correct.
And Latrell was charged on October the 20th of 2020, correct?
I'd have to refer to the date on the warrant, but it would have been within a day or two after that incident.
Okay. And just so we can walk the jury through the process, when an individual is arrested, they normally have 72 hours before they can be released or arraigned on those charges, correct?
That's correct.
And it appears that based on your information and your knowledge that Latrell was arraigned on these charges within that 72-hour time frame, correct?
I don't have the date that he was arraigned. He may not be arraigned. He must be charged and the warrant signed. Whether he was arraigned within that time frame, I don't know the date, the specific dates.
Would you agree with me if I said that on the docket, it reads October the 20th of 2020 when he was charged and arraigned?
I would have nothing to dispute that.
Okay. And when an individual is arraigned, they're given a bond, correct?
That's correct.
And with a bond, they can get out of jail or they can stay in until they post that bond, correct?
Correct.
Now, based on your knowledge and the information that you have during the course of this investigation, Latrell was kind of in and out of jail throughout from October the 18th all the way through February 14th, correct?
I believe there was just one time.
Okay. Do you know when he got out of jail?
I Made a note on that notepad over there.
Uh, Maybe this might help refresh your recollection.
Yes, it will. Latrell was released from jail on December 19th.
Now, as we've discussed and you talked about on direct examination, there's a lot of back and forth between Latrell and Alexa. I love you, I hate you, kind of going around in a circle, correct?
Yes,
Now, after October the 18th, there were no other incidents in which Alexa claims that Latrell King assaulted her, correct?
Judge, I'm going to object. I wasn't allowed to get into this earlier when Mr. Crawford objected to prior rulings.
Sustain the objection.
All right, very well, Your Honor. Now, you've read all the reports and you were aware that the neighbor to Alexa was familiar with the Latrell King, correct?
yes.
Now, prior to charging Latrell King on October the 20th, did you have an opportunity to interview Alexa Van Warmer?
I did not.
Okay. So prior to charging Latrell King with home invasion and aggravated stalking, you weren't aware that he went to dinner with Alexis Van Warmer in Detroit?
I was not.
Prior to charging Latrell King with home invasion and aggravated stalking, you weren't aware that she left him at the gas station that day?
I don't believe I had that knowledge, no.
Prior to charging Latrell King with home invasion and aggravated stalking, were you aware that when she left him at the gas station, she had his cell phone and his keys?
Not at that time.
Were you ever aware of what Alexis Van Warmer's blood alcohol content level was on this day?
No.
And it's apparent from the text messages and, well, also, excuse me, in addition to the text messages, there were also video calls and phone calls between the two, correct?
I believe there is. I did not view or listen to those.
Court's indulgence. No further questions, Your Honor.
Anything else, Mr. Souter?
Just briefly, Judge. Now, Detective, the two defense exhibits that are introduced for communications between the defendant and the victim, I think between February 1st and the 14th of this year, again, is that a portion of those messages?
Correct.
Okay, but that's not all of them, is that correct?
No, it is not all of them. And
Okay.
47 includes dates outside of that range.
Earlier dates?
Yes.
Okay. And did you have a chance through your investigation to provide me with a copy of all the communications between February 1st and February 14th of this year?
Yes.
Judge, if I may approach?
You may.
Now, Detective, that proposed exhibit, it's sizably thicker than the two defense exhibits, correct?
Yes.
And after reviewing and what you prepared, is that the complete text communication between the defendant and the victim for that time frame?
Yes, it is.
Fair and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Judge, we'd move to admit people's proposed, is that 49?
49.
No objection.
Exhibit 49 will also be admitted.
Thank you. Judge, I have no more further questions for Detective Warden.
Anything else, Mr. Crawford?
No, Your Honor.
You may step down. Call your next witness, Mr. Souter.
Judge, at this point in time, saving potential rebuttal, depending on what happens, we would rest.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to break for today since the prosecution has rested the case. Caution you once again not to discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone else or listen to any news reports should there be any concerning this trial. Have a pleasant evening. We'll see you back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. can be seated. Record should reflect the jury is not present at this time. Anything for the record, Mr. Souter?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Mr. Crawford?
Yes, Your Honor. After having the opportunity to speak to my client, we would like to place a few things on the record.
Proceed.
Mr. King, you understand that you have a constitutionally guaranteed right to testify in this matter, correct?
Yes.
And you understand that if you do not testify, the jury cannot hold that against you, correct?
Yes.
You and I have thoroughly discussed this issue, correct?
Correct.
And this is your choice and your choice alone, correct?
Correct.
And after speaking with me, what is your decision in this matter in regards to you testifying?
I don't want to.
You have to
Speak
speak
up a
up.
little louder.
I don't want to. I prefer not to, Your Honor.
All right. Anything else you wish to place on the record, Mr. Crawford?
At this time, the defense would rest.
All right. We'll have you rest in front of the jury tomorrow as well, Mr. Crawford. And also, I've received proposed instructions from my clerk. Have you both received those finalized forms?
Yes, Judge.
I would ask you to review them this evening and bring any objections or corrections to the court's attention tomorrow. If there are none, I intend to bring the jury in. Mr. Crawford, you can rest in front of them. We'll go right into closing arguments. All right?
Very well.